it's like having your own children. And that was the best advice we got 13 years ago or so when we started billeting back in Swift Current. The advice we got was treat them like your own children. And of course they're young men, right? They're teenagers, and so there's always a balancing act there, but we do become attached to them, and for some, particularly the two boys we had last year, Parker Tobin and Tyler Smith, we did become very close to them, even though they were only with us for 5 months.
You also described the idea of forgiveness, which we've heard a lot here in the last 2 days. What is your belief now about how you feel about the driver in this case?
It's hard to forgive. As a person of faith, a Christian, I feel I'm commanded to forgive. And sometimes that's harder to do than we would like. But it was easier for me when Mr. Sidhu admitted that he was responsible for the accident. And when he pled guilty, it was easier for me to say, I forgive. But it's still an emotional struggle to forgive. But I also know that grief is a journey, and I need to forgive to move on in that journey. And so for my own good, for my loved ones, I know that it's important to forgive, whether we feel like it or not.
You also had a message for the court on that, asking them not to ruin his life. Could you tell us about that?
Well, we've all heard speculation about what the penalty will be for Mr. Sidhu in this case, and some of those numbers are kind of staggering. And I would just ask, since he has admitted responsibility, I think he is remorseful. And I was told that he is remorseful. And in that case, I think some mercy is important. Justice is important, but mercy is important too. And so my request that the court consider that his life not be ruined forever by this one terrible, terrible mistake.
I think you ended by saying, therefore, he would be the 30th victim.
Yeah, he would be. And I know he probably feels like a victim now. I know Mark said that yesterday in his interview, and I resonate with that. I don't want to see him and his life ruined for one terrible mistake.
Mr. Jefferson, you mentioned your love for Parker Tobin and the twist that he was misidentified. Can you explain for us the emotional turmoil of that period?
I don't really want to spend too much time on that because it was an emotional, very difficult time for my wife and I. To honor Parker, I would say Sunday night when we found out that Parker had passed in the accident was even more difficult than Friday night, the night of the accident. And I would say we don't blame anyone. We never felt that it was anything other than a terrible, tragic accident of misidentification. And that's all I want to say.
Can you talk about just how difficult it was to even put together this victim impact statement? I mean, what was that like for you?
Well, actually, I plagiarized myself. I went back to my journal and I read some of the thoughts and feelings I had last spring. And that passage from Psalms that I read was one that I read over and over again last April. And so some of it came from that, and some of it came from reflecting on where we are today.
Do you feel that this process will be helpful for your own grief journey and those of the other parents?
I hope so. It will be for me, and I hope it is for the Billet parents and the parents. I know we were close to Parker and many of the other boys, but their parents are the ones that suffer far more a sense of loss and grief than we do as billets. And so my hope is that everyone receives some healing through this court proceeding, the victim impact statements, the preparation and the reading, you can hear the emotion, you can hear the grief, and I hope that that is healing for everyone, because that's what we need.
Has it been difficult hearing other people's accounts in addition to having to give your own?
Yes.
Can you, how do you get through it?
Sometimes you just pray for strength. Sometimes you think to yourself, this is really hard, but it needs to be said and it needs to be heard.